All right, hey everybody. So I'm gonna do these videos faster this time. Let me fix my screen. As you all know, I have issues with technology. I'm gonna put these out throughout the semester, so hopefully we can get all together when we need it instead of cramming at the end. So this is contracts, the first 2 weeks. So acceptance and offer, bilateral, unilateral contracts. And we just started consideration, but not going into that today. So here's the outline so far. So 1, why enforce a contract? And there's some theories. There's the moral theory, autonomy theory, and economic theory. The moral theory says you promise, so the court should make you perform. People should fulfill their promises. People have a moral duty to fulfill their commitments. And this is like the kid with the Pepsi points, and with a kid with the Pepsi points, the moral theory says give the Pepsi kid the plane. The autonomy theory says we want to create economic relationships, and the economic theory, don't get them confused, although I can't imagine us having the questions. Anyway, economic theory says each person feels better after a bargain than before they had the bargain, and it increases utility in the aggregate, and damages here look like fulfilling expectations of contract and damages from breach. So fulfilling expectations set by the contract, and then damage comes from breach. So so when you look at a contract, like in an exam, we're told to ask, use the objective theory, is this a contract? So you're gonna look and say, was there an offer, was there an acceptance? And then use the objective theory to determine whether the parties have both assented to the contract. And this was the Uris brothers and the Azadi cases. And then mutual assent says, do parties agree? Offer, acceptance. Was there an offer which could have been accepted? This is Lonergan, money coming to the door to pay the money. Nope, he revoked it. And then was the offer accepted before the author was revoked? And that's the Mile case. If you don't know what these are, look them up. And then for the accepted before the revocation, that was also Peterson and Cook. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And then you're going to ask, was consideration what is being exchanged here? But we're not going to cover that today. We're going to cover that next time. So what is mutual assent? The objective theory says we look at what's written and acted, not what's intended in your head. We don't care what's going on in your head. If there wasn't a manifestation of that intent on paper, we're not gonna impugn that to give you leverage. So there is not subjective intent for mutual assent. And we use the reasonable person standard, and that given to us was, it follows that the test of a true interpretation of an offer or acceptance is not what the party making it thought it meant or intended it to mean, but what a reasonable person in the position of the parties would have thought it meant. So based on what's on the paper, what does a reasonable person in the position of those parties, what would they think it meant? And then why have the objective theory? Well, it looks like agreement. If it looks like agreement, then it's agreement. So we have a few reasons, and that's evidentiary pragmatism. Litigants are testifying on their own behalf, and people lie. We need to prove with evidence. A contract is evidence of what the agreement was. And then we have reliance and economic concerns. People are acting based upon the acts of the counterparty. Therefore, we need to look at the action, not the intent. All we know is what we see and hear. We need to rely on the agreements we have made because our deals are made as a result, such as you contract with me to buy flour, and then you don't fulfill it, but in the midst of me contracting for flour with you, my plan is to make donuts. So I buy an oven for those donuts, and I buy a donut shop. And now I'm sitting in the donut shop with my oven and no flour to make the donuts. And I did those all because of my reliance upon my contract with you to get flour. And then we have expanding scope of freedom of contract, and parties are more easily able to enter contractual arrangements because they do not have to discern subjective intent. So we want to encourage contracts and bargaining and people coming together for this. And if we don't enforce these contracts, if we just say, oh, well, that's not what people meant, it's going to discourage that freedom. So the downside to the objective theory is it's not easy for a fact finder to determine what is reasonable. And duty to read can lead to a waiver of rights. This is especially problematic when one party is unsophisticated. Pretty much anytime they say, like, tap that button or you can't have what I want. We'll get more into that later, I'm sure. Okay. A bargain is needed to show the parties had mutual assent to the exchange and consideration. This is Restatement 17, which is the requirement of a bargain, and it states, a form of contract requires a bargain in which there is a manifestation, objective theory, did you act in a way that it looks like you agree? There is a manifestation of mutual assent to the exchange and a consideration, which we'll talk about later. The old rule was meeting of the minds. We're not even going to really talk about that because we don't have it anymore. So get some points on an exam like the old rule was meeting of the minds. We don't have that anymore. Because it gives points to the reservation of a party and not the manifestation to the contract. All right, now we have bilateral contracts. So this was a big heading under what we were talking about. Bilateral contracts is a promise for a promise. So bilateral coming from two ways. That's why it's bi. A promise for a promise. Most commercial contracts are bilateral contracts. In a bilateral contract, the parties each exchange promises to perform. Promise for a promise. Bilateral. Hypo is, I promise to give you a laptop if you promise to give me $1,000. Acceptance, I accept. That is, I promise to give you $1,000 in exchange for your promise to give me a laptop. It is not performance. It is a promise for a promise. Offer and acceptance under bilateral contracts is Restatement 22, mode of assent, offer and acceptance. And this says the manifestation of mutual assent to an exchange ordinarily takes the form of an offer or proposal by one party, followed by the acceptance by the other party or parties. So an offer is a reasonable person would believe if they say that if a reasonable person will say that they accept, then there is a deal. So that's an offer. If a reasonable person would look at the deal and say, oh, if I accept this, then we have a deal, then. So and this goes under Restatement 24, and that says, an offer is the manifestation of willingness to enter into a bargain so made as to justify another person in understanding that his assent to that bargain is invited and will conclude it. So an offer says, I'm inviting you, and when you accept, then it's concluded. It is reasonable to believe if I say I accept, then we will have a deal. In a nutshell. Okay, then we have some other issues. So like an offer to make an offer. So the Restatement 26 is for preliminary negotiation, and there's two parts. No, there's one part in the hypo. So the Restatement says a manifestation of willingness to enter into a bargain is not an offer if the person to whom it is addressed knows or has reason to know that the person making it does not intend to conclude a bargain until he has made further manifestation of assent. So it's only an offer if it means it will conclude when the acceptance is given. And the hypo is houses on the market. An offer from the homeowner is an offer to sell, which means make an offer to me to buy, and I will decide if I will accept it. This can also be true in advertisements. Advertisements are seen as an offer to the buyer to come in and offer that price. They are not offer acceptances. They are not offer acceptances. Okay, accepting the bilateral offer, Restatement 50 says acceptance of the offer. And it says acceptance of an offer is a manifestation of assent to the terms thereof made by the offeree in a manner invited or required by the offer. So how do you accept an offer? Well, they say you promise to give me $1,000, and then you say I promise to give you $1,000. If you say I promise to give you $500, no acceptance. It's accepting the offer as it's given. And then we have a mailbox rule. So Restatement 63, time when acceptance takes place. In a we'll read that in a minute. But basically, if you put an acceptance into the mailbox, it is accepted. And unless the offeror has told you ways to accept and you did not do them. So the Restatement 63 says, unless the offer provides otherwise, an offer made in a manner and by a medium invited by an offer is operative and completes the manifestation of mutual assents as soon as put out of the offeree's possession, which is a mailbox, without regard to whether it ever reaches the offerer. Tricky. So the pros of this are it allows the offeree to rely on the contract faster. The offeror still retains the power to modify when acceptance takes effect. So the mailbox rule is the default rule, but the offeror can say no mailbox rule, and that's fair. Waiting until the offeror received the acceptance would likely require offeror to send a confirmation receipt. Okay. So the cons of this are same item could be sold to two people if the offeror did not realize that it had been accepted yet. Okay, and then we have a general rule for advertisements is that they're not offers but merely solicitations of an offer, that if someone comes in with that money, the advertiser will accept the offer of the customer. This is a lot. One reason for this is due to inventory issues. If every advertisement was a promise to untold number of people, there's no way to help that. But if, like in Azadi, this is a bait and switch, we were just doing that to bring you in and we have no intention of, and we were misleading you, the court can rule that is an offer. So don't be a dirty dog. Okay, termination of an offer. This is the Restatement 36, the method of termination of the power of acceptance. So an offeree's power of acceptance may be terminated by 1, the rejection of a counteroffer by the offeree. Okay, so a counteroffer ends the original offer. So the counteroffer becomes a wholly new offer. Objective theory then says the terms, like time is of the essence, do not go forward in the new offer except where explicitly stated. So even if it's just a change of the contract, if it says, I agree to sell, but the buyer is making a counteroffer, well, the buyer is agreeing to buy. So it's not going to be strictly construed. It is going to be strictly construed, and it's not going to be in their favor. We had a case on that. I don't have it written down. Figure it out if you want. Rule 39 goes to this. Rule 39 is for counteroffers, and it says a counteroffer is an offer made by an offeree to his offeror relating to the same matter as the original offer and proposing a substituted bargain differing from that proposed by the original offer. So now the original or has to be the one who is now the E. So it flip-flops, but it's a new offer. An offeree's power of acceptance is terminated by his making of a counteroffer unless the offeror has manifested a contrary intention or unless the counteroffer manifests a contrary intention of the offeree. Either party can expressly say they are not terminating the counteroffer. So they have to say it. If they say if they specifically say they are not terminating the offer, then they get to do it. But it's got to be said, it's got to be written, it's got to be evidence. Guys, none of this in my head. Doesn't work. Objective. All right, it is best practice to use language that doesn't cancel the offer. What do you think? But when one does this, it tips their hand to the offerer, who now knows that they are trying not to cancel the original deal, and they will likely accept. Okay, another way to terminate is lapse of time or a reasonable amount of time. Reasonable amount of time is Restatement 41, lapse of time. An offeree's power of acceptance is terminated at the time specified in the offer, or if no time is specified, at the end of a reasonable time. And then what is a reasonable time is a question of fact, depending on all the circumstances existing when the offer and attempted acceptance are made. So reasonable time. None of us want to talk about that. Okay, the revocation of an offer or any time before acceptance occurs in a bilateral contract, the offeror can say no offers off the table. Rule Restatement 43, indirect communication of a revocation. An offeree's power of acceptance is terminated when the offeror takes definite action inconsistent with the intention to enter into a proposed contract, and the offeree requires reliable information to that effect. So they have to be told. If they weren't told, the offer is still on the table, even if it's impossible. Question: why should the offer remain effective until the offeree learns of the termination? Answer: until that point, the offeree might rely on that offer. It is also terminated at the death or incapacity of the offeror or offeree. Restatement 29 is offeror is master of his offer. The offeror is master of his offer, just as the making of any offer at all can be avoided by appropriate language or other conduct, so can the power of acceptance be narrowly limited. The offeror can make any stipulation he wants on the offer as long as the acceptor agrees to it. But the offeror doesn't have to take his acceptance if it's not the way he asked. Restatement 58 is necessity of acceptance complying with the terms of the offer. An acceptance must comply with the requirements of the offer as to the promise to be made or the promise to be rendered. So this is called a mirror offer. I'll take it, but give me two instead of the one you promised. No. Acceptance is only acceptance if one is accepting the actual terms of the offer. All right, then we have some time lapse if we use an option contract, and that is Restatement 25. Option contract limits offeror's power to revoke on an offer. And an option contract is a promise which meets the requirements for the formation of a contract and limits the promisor's power to revoke an offer. Language is strictly construed here. Norville counteroffer still said agree to purchase, so the option contract did not pass to the counteroffer. And then in a true option contract must have separate consideration from the offer. So you can buy my house for $20,000. If you put down $1,000, I'll give you 10 days to think about it. That extra $1,000 is the consideration for the option. If there isn't that, then it won't be a true option contract. And then we have unilateral contracts, and this is a promise for a performance, an acceptance. So a promise for performance. So acceptance by completion. A true unilateral contract is acceptance by completion. That's the traditional rule. So examples: paint my house and I will give you $1,000. Acceptance happens when painting is complete. First come, first serve might be unilateral because you're saying, you do this, you perform, and I will give you this. So Restatement 32 says invitation of promise or performance. Okay, so if it's ambiguous or if you're given the option, in case of doubt, an offer is interpreted as inviting the offeree to accept, either by promising to perform what the offer requests or by rendering the performance as the offeree chooses. So they get to choose. The difference, so that's basically deciding, do you want to have a unilateral or a bilateral? You can either promise for a promise or promise for performance. But in a true unilateral promise for performance, the person performing doesn't have to finish. They can paint half the fence and then decide, I don't want to go on with the deal, and they can walk away, totally within their power. In an ambiguous situation, once they start, that is entering into the contract to do it. So there's a little bit of difference there. If it is ambiguous, E can promise or perform, which is we just said, and that is Restatement 62, effect of performance by the E, which is the person promisee. I'm going to say E and or now, where offer invites either promise or performance. If promise, then contract is formed and E must finish, essentially a bilateral contract. If performance is given, then E is obligated to complete the performance. So that's different than the traditional rule of unilateral contracts. Then we have Restatement 25, option contracts created by part performance or tender begins. So in the traditional rule, when you start performance, you are not required to finish, and the offeror can take it away from you at any time. But in the restatement jurisdictions, an option contract is created. So an option contract is a promise which meets the requirements for the formation of a contract and limits the promisor's power to revoke an offer. So for partial performance, once it starts, an offeror can't take back their promise. It's a contract. Likewise, the E has to finish in partial performance. And that's Restatement 25. Restatement, well, okay, it's a little combination. So Restatement 45, option contract created by part performance or tender. So 25 is the beginning. 45 is the contract created. And it says where an offeror invites an offeree to accept by rendering a performance and does not invite the promissory acceptance, an option contract is created when the offeree tenders or begins the invited performance or tenders the beginning of it. The offer becomes temporarily irrevocable. So it becomes revocable by both the offer and acceptance. They have to finish in the restatement. Restatement comment, which Restatement 45, Restatement 45, comment E, which is just an extension of this, completion of performance, where part performance or tender by the offeree creates an option contract. I'm gonna have to look that up. Okay, because I have offerees not bound. Give me a second. I'm gonna look this up. Even though this is longer than I wanted it to be. 45. Restatement 45. I'm pretty sure I looked this up before. Okay. Okay, well, we'll have to ask on that one. I'm pretty sure the offeree is bound. Okay, Restatement 62, effective performance by offeree, where offer invites either performance or promise, which is ambiguous. We already said that. You get to pick. Once you start, you have to stop. Unilateral options effect on revocation. So the traditional rule, Patterson, this is just on the offeror being able to revoke. Patterson, I think it is. Revocable until performance is completed. That's the traditional rule. In the restatement, part performance makes the offer irrevocable. And then Cook used a different standard. It used substantial performance. And that makes the offer irrevocable. And then we had a bunch of Mr. Miyagi things, which I'm going to check into. And then agreement to agree. Uncertainty sometimes undermines mutual assent. Parties reach an agreement on a number of matters, but have left some terms open for future agreement. Okay. So notice provision in lease agreements. Cook, no rent agreed on, nor formula or arbitration agreement. A term such as rent, which is both essential to the agreement and is a term typically addressed concretely, cannot be implied. Restatement 33 is certainty, and it says, even though a manifestation of intention is intended to be understood as an offer, it cannot be accepted so as to form a contract unless the terms of the contract are reasonably certain. So like if rent isn't there, you're going to have a problem. The terms of a contract are reasonably certain if they provide a basis for determining the existence of a breach and for giving an appropriate remedy. So if rent wasn't in there, it could have a formula to be able to find that rent. But it can't be ambiguous language that doesn't tell us how to find it. The fact that one or more terms of a proposed bargain are left open or uncertain may show that a manifestation of intention is not intended to be understood as an offer or as an acceptance. No agreement, no contract. So that was all Restatement 33, but Comment E of 33 says an indefinite price, where the parties manifest an intention not to be bound unless the amount of money to be paid by one of them is fixed or agreed, and it is not fixed or agreed, there is no contract. Similar principles to the Uniform Commercial Code apply to contracts for the rendition of service. So parties have reached an agreement in principle, but contemplate execution of a formal contract. So start with document, look at terms, look at the circumstances. This is Quake v. American Airlines. And this is, so letters of intent. These hinge on the parties' intention. So in this case, we looked at, was the letter relied upon to start work? Did it authorize work? Did it give the power to terminate the agreement? In Cook's case, in Quake's case, it absolutely did. And so they said, of course, they could rely on it. Restatement 27 says existence of a contract where written memorial is contemplated, and this is manifestations of assent that are in themselves sufficient to conclude a contract will not be prevented from so operating by the fact that the parties also manifest an intention to prepare and adopt a written memorial thereof, but the circumstances may show that the agreements are preliminary negotiations. So in the first case, we had a contract that some of the terms were not decided when the contract was into. This is if we have had a negotiation, we wrote it down on scratch paper, we said we're going to put a contract together later, that it can be a manifestation of assent. And the theory for this it's called formalists. The new formalists look at an agreement. If it's not on paper, they do not care. It deters sloppiness while creating contracts and creates efficiency over time. So they sincerely look at the objective theory and say, if it's not on paper, we don't care. We're not going to take it. Anything not on paper is sloppy. The anti-formalists say, hey, we think it's better in the long run to fill in gaps. So if you don't say what the rent is or how to find it, we will just tell you what the rent can be. But this excuses the makers of mistakes because the court's going to fill in, and this also poses a problem to efficiency in the court. So that is agreement and mutual assent and bilateral and unilateral and option contracts. Happy studying.